18 days. And here's what I know. My Democratic sources say Vice President Biden's campaign is now working to expand the political map into the Deep South and the Sun Belt. Whispers of a blue wave, they grow louder by the day. Inside the GOP, my sources are upbeat about Judge Amy Coney Barrett's likely confirmation, but Republicans are worried about the Democrats' hits on health care and about getting pulled into President Trump's riptide of grievances. Those grievances, however, were front and center at this week's dueling town halls.
I denounce white supremacy.
Okay.
What's your next question? I just don't know about QAnon. What I do hear about it is they are very strongly against pedophilia, and I agree with that. I'm good with masks. I'm okay with masks. I tell people wear masks, but people with masks are catching it all the time.
And here is Democratic nominee Joe Biden.
We're in a situation where we have 210,000+ people dead. And what's he doing? Nothing. He's still not wearing masks and so on. I have not been a fan of court packing. What the Biden Justice Department will do is let the Department of Justice be the Department of Justice.
Joining us tonight are three of Washington's best reporters, Chuck Todd, moderator of Meet the Press, and NBC News' political director, also host of Meet the Press Daily on MSNBC, Jane Mayer, chief Washington correspondent for The New Yorker, and Ayesha Rascoe, White House reporter for National Public Radio. Chuck, let's start with you. You heard the grievance from President Trump. Is his grievance the closing message for his campaign?
Well, it appears that it is going to be his closing message. I think there are a lot of people around him that wish it were not his closing message, and that's really what struck me this week and at the town hall at that point was the fact that, look, the president using grievance as his delivery of message is not a new thing. It's what grievances he's channeling. At the town hall last night, it was all about him. It was his complaints, the complaints about the New York Times and his tax returns, or the complaints about the Russia hoax, as he might call it, or the complaints about not enough attention to Hunter Biden. 4 years ago, it was grievance-based, but he was channeling the grievances of his base. He was talking about immigration. He was talking about issues. Now, he may have done it in a very crude way, and it may have alienated some people, but they were issues, and he was channeling somebody else's grievance. Right now, they're all about him, and I think that's one of the big differences from 4 years ago, Robert.
Jane, you cover not only grievances in American politics, but the conspiracies that are rising on the right. How is that factoring into this campaign, the president's refusal to disavow QAnon, a conspiracy theory that the FBI has warned could be domestic terrorism?
You know, I mean, his strategy has been from the start to double down on his base rather than trying to broaden his support. And there was a sense, I think, in the town hall this week that he is now being driven almost into the corner of his base. So you really see him embracing some of the fringiest of the fringe conspiracy theories like QAnon. I mean, it's not just that he didn't denounce QAnon. He actually kind of embraced it and sort of pretended that that it wasn't total nonsense, which I think, as you said, his own FBI knows that it is. So it's a little bit like a version of the birtherism that he embraced in earlier campaigns. But this one is really wacky, and he's not disavowing it.
Why is that, Aisha? When you're talking to your White House sources, Ashley Parker wrote today in the Post that the president embraces anyone who praises him. Does it come down to that?
I believe so. I mean, anyone who he feels like is on his side, who is not critical of him, he feels like it's us against them. And I think you see this also when President Trump has been called out over and over again over not calling out white supremacy. How hard is it to denounce white supremacy? And the most that you can get from President Trump, now he'll be defensive and say he's done it over and over again, but the most he will say is, oh, sure, I denounce it. He'll get a stronger denunciation iteration of Morning Joe out of President Trump. He does not have, if he feels like people on the right, protesters or people who are agitators on the right, if he feels like they are somehow not upset with him, then he can find a way to just kind of, if it's not a wink or a nod, it's not a strong denunciation. That's the way he has behaved his entire presidency.
But what about Vice President Biden, Chuck? If this is how the president's closing the campaign, is his strategy enough? Is his ground game enough to counter that blizzard of information and sometimes disinformation coming out of the White House?
We're going to find out. I mean, I will say this. I have my, I have some concern that you see the sort of the lack of the physical field program. And we know that I think the Biden campaign suddenly, if you've noticed, Robert, there's a lot more surrogates suddenly showing up in battleground states. There is a concern, I think, among some Democrats that, hey, this virtual campaign, it's done wonders on the fundraising front. It's certainly allowed for plenty of TV advertising, plenty of digital advertising. What is missing with the hand-to-hand campaigning? Is that going to be something they regret? That said, this is a case where their operation essentially is fused with their message. And so the message is what? Focus on the virus. That's number one. And so in that sense, it does keep this campaign on message. And ultimately, I believe it's still the best closing argument they can have, which is to stay focused on the virus.
Jane, we heard from the Biden campaign that they had a record fundraising haul this week. But what is the real story based on your reporting about where money is in this campaign, both the public funds, the public money that we know that's publicly disclosed, and also the dark money that you've reported on for years?
Well, I mean, there's a gigantic amount of money in this race, but just most recently, there was a new set of FEC filings that show that among the largest campaign contributors are a handful of the richest people in the country, which has been par for the course for the last few years. And one of them was Sheldon Adelson and his wife Miriam, who are Las Vegas casino owners, and they've put in over $100 million into Donald Trump. So you're seeing some very, very big bets from a handful of the biggest donors. You know, there are a few alarming other sort of signs that I think you can see. There was a piece in the New York Times that suggests that voter registration is way up for Republicans in some of the battleground states. So that business, that kind of apparatus, to some extent, is paid for by private donors and dark money groups that get out and do that sort of thing.
Jane, just to follow up, Adelson got in relatively late with some of this cash. Are Republican donors sticking with President Trump at this critical point in the campaign?
Well, I mean, it depends which Republican donors you're talking about. Wall Street appears to be shifting from the Republican Party to backing Biden. And I think there's a sense that Wall Street is tired of the chaos in the Trump period and is looking for something different, and maybe also worried about the economy because of the coronavirus and the lack of any kind of coordinated federal effort on it. So you're seeing some shifts, and and Biden certainly has a ton of money, and you can basically, really, truly, after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, there was suddenly a tremendous flood of money into the Senate races on the Democratic side. That single event seems to have just triggered a gusher of small donations to all these Senate races.
Let's dig into that, Aisha, because you've been reporting about how the map is expanding. I'm hearing it from Democrats. You see the president going to Georgia, a Republican stronghold. The Democrats looking at Texas. They're looking at Georgia, South Carolina, the Senate race there with Jamie Harrison. Is some of this new money, the big money for Biden, going to go now into the Deep South and the Sun Belt?
Well, it seems like they can try to make a pitch for those places. I think part of it may be just keeping the Trump campaign on its toes and making them spend in some of these places that they shouldn't have to be. I mean, the president is in Macon, Georgia today. Why does a Republican president have to be in Macon, Georgia, 18 days out from the election? That is not good. And so if they can use some of this, this gusher of cash that has come in to kind of make them fight on all of these, on all of this territory, that's in the Democrats' favor. But I don't know about these polls that are showing things tight down, in places like Georgia or Texas. It seems very, hard to believe that Biden would be able to pull something out like that. Even in South Carolina, with the Senate race there, it's difficult to believe, but there is this belief that if you spend the money, that possibly because of the coronavirus, because of all these things, that the map could be a bit different this time around.
Chuck, do your sources believe it?
Well, they do, because it's a green wave, Robert. I mean, the amount of money, Jane is right. I mean, the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg just turned on a spigot for these Senate races, and it trickles all the way down. I mean, look, the investments in Texas by the Biden campaign are as much about helping down the ballot that flip that state house. Democrats suddenly are looking at flipping the state legislature in Arizona, in Texas, an outside shot in Florida, outside shot in Iowa. That's where all this extra money is coming down, and that's one of the motives. This is how Biden's helping down the ballots. He's not transferring money, but he's playing in some states that you'd be like, why is he playing there? It's as much about helping the ticket all the way down, because Democrats see some major opportunities here that aren't just your handful of Senate races, extra House races, but some state legislatures. And remember, next year's a redistricting year.